Welcome to our webinar on the effects of underwater noise on fish in the Baltic Sea. We're very thrilled to have you here. And if I'm not mistaken, we had over 90 participants joining us today for this very important discussion. So first of all, I would like to say a big thank you to all of you participating. And of course, a huge thank you to our experts who agreed to share with us their knowledge in this very important topic. I would also like to quickly introduce myself. So my name is Aliki Kolavu. I have a master's in aquaculture and marine research management, and I work for FishSec as a fisheries policy officer. Today, I will be your moderator for this webinar, and we're really looking forward to an engaging and very insightful session. To begin, I'd like to say a few words about the organization who made this event possible. So first, for FishSec. FishSec is a politically independent non-profit organization dedicated to the protection and restoration of marine ecosystem services with a focus on fisheries. FishSec was established in 2003, and our work is focused mainly on policy development in the EU and in the Baltic Sea region. Our vision is well-managed seas with rich biodiversity, thriving fish stocks, and a sustainable fishing sector. For the second partner organization, Coalition Clean Baltic, or CCB, essentially, CCB is an umbrella organization founded in Helsinki in 1990. CCB brings together national NGOs across the Baltic Sea to work collaboratively on environmental issues facing this unique marine ecosystem. Together, these member organizations represent nearly 1.5 million members from countries surrounding the Baltic. At this point, it is important for me to tell you that today's event is part of a bigger project called the Red Noise Project, which addresses underwater noise as a critical but often overlooked environmental issue that affects marine life. And the funding for today came from the Swedish Institute and is also supported by EU Life and the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. The focus for today's session will be specifically on the impact of underwater noise on fish, even though the topic of underwater noise is one with global implications. However, today we will keep our discussion centered on fish species and ecosystems. I think I would like to also say a few things about the flow of how we were going to do this webinar today. So we will start with our presentations from our experts, as you've all seen. For which we really encourage you to participate actively. You can submit any questions you may have in the Q&A section during each presentation. And then after each of the presentations, we might have some time for one or two quick questions that will be chosen from the ones that you will be submitting. In total, we have 4 experts today, so there's going to be 4 presentations. After the first 2 presentations, we're going to have a small 10-minute break, and then we will continue. Now, following the presentations, we'll move into a panel discussion where we'll address your questions in more in-depth manner, and we will also explore the topic further as a group. One more thing I would like to mention is that today we have the possibility of policy interpretation. So for those of you who would like to use that, you can see in the bottom screen of Zoom, there is you can click on interpretation, and then you can choose between English and Polish, so you can change your language there. So that is all I have to say for now. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce to you our panel coordinator and an expert on underwater noise in fish, Bettina Taylor. She will be now taking us through some key points for today's subject. Bettina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aliki. Also from me, a very warm welcome to this webinar. We're really happy about the amount of interest this raised. I always find it a bit of a shame when we can't see each other, and probably all participants feel like that a little bit. You can just see us and not each other, but there are 69 people besides us now in the webinar. And yeah, there was no other technical way to do it for this amount of people. So sorry about that, but please feel free to still interact with us, as Aliki said, under the Q&A section. And some of you already sent us some questions, which we will try to take over in the panel. Yeah, just maybe a few sentences about, I guess, the context and the framework. So I work for Friends of the Earth Germany, and I'm also the chair of CCB currently. And we have been following the underwater noise topic and policies for several years now. Especially at EU and in the HELCOM context. And it's also in this context that we are here now. So 2 years ago, the EU delivered some thresholds, some threshold values for underwater noise, continuous and impulsive underwater noise. But the exact details of how to fill in these thresholds, how to do the assessments are basically now left in the regional seas assessments. So for HELCOM, we have a group that's called EG Noise, Expert Group on Underwater Noise. And that is a group that is currently working on these details. And while we worked together with this group in a workshop, we also saw that especially the topic of fish and underwater noise is one that has many gaps still, and where we are unsure what could be species that could be good for assessment, what is actually the impact on fish. And this is also one reason why we have decided to set up this webinar, and we're very happy to have those experts here that will give you an introduction now in the following. So with this, thanks again, thanks to the audience and thanks to the experts, and I'll hand over to Aliki to start us into the afternoon. Thanks.
Very nice. Thank you, Bettina, again. So I think we're set to start with our first experts presentation. So we have Anna Sara here with us today. I will give her some time to share her screen. I will just briefly tell you a few things. So Anna Sara Krank is working for IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute. For today, her topic is going to be an overview of impacts of underwater noise on fish and invertebrates from shipping and recreational boats. So Anna Sara, now you can share your screen, please.
So now you see my screen, as you should.
Yes, we see it. We see presenter's view.
Again.
Yeah, you have to go to the display settings again as before.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes, now it works perfectly.
Okay, let's hope the sound works as well. Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm Anna Sara Krong, and I'm a senior researcher in marine ecology and ecotoxicology at IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute. And as said, I will give an overview of the topic today on impacts on underwater noise from ships and recreational boats on fish, but also on invertebrates, because that is actually what I am mainly working on. And I will try to give examples mainly from species from the Baltic Sea, but also from the Swedish West Coast and the North Sea, just so you know. Okay, so the sea is full of noise. Of course, there are lots of natural sounds produced by animals, by wave, wind, rain, ice, and so on. But there is also a rapid change in the marine soundscape through introduction of lots of anthropogenic noise. And a lot of this noise comes from commercial ships, but also from other vessels and motorboats. And of course, offshore wind turbines, seabed drilling, but also impulsive noise such as pile driving and exposures. But I will not go into those today. So shipping is actually the major source for underwater noise, and shipping is also increasing worldwide. And noise pollution from larger commercial ships in offshore water is also where we have most knowledge today. And the Baltic Sea holds some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, with over 40,000 ship passages per year. And in the figure here, you can see a snapshot of real-time ship traffic from the world oceans, but also from the seas around Sweden, including the Baltic Sea. And all this increased ship traffic has led to a large increase in low frequency underwater noise along major shipping lanes. And in these areas, marine animals, they are likely more or less chronically exposed to underwater noise all year round. But in addition to all this ship noise, in countries like Sweden, we have a very long coastline. There is also seasonally very heavy traffic from recreational boats. But this, we don't know that as much as from the shipping noise. And this is just an example of how it may look on a sunny, warm day during the summer, during vacation. It's just outside here where I live on the Swedish west coast. So yes, there can be lots of recreational boats in the water. Only in Sweden, there are about 800,000 recreational motorboats, and this is actually one of the highest numbers per capita in the world. And even though there might not be more recreational boats than compared to the 70s, there are more motorboats, and they also have much more powerful engines compared to 50 years ago. And also the traffic is very concentrated to shallow, coastal, more sensitive areas, like archipelagos and shallow bays where a lot of invertebrates and fish have their nursing grounds. And the traffic is also concentrating to spring and summer, where most of the animals have their reproductive season and therefore are extra sensitive. And in a Danish study, they actually could see that recreational vessels can dominate the soundscape in a shallow coastal area. And this was despite the fact that the area where they studied this was close to a shipping lane. And I will give you an idea of what it sounds like. So I will play some boat noise for you. And these are from recordings that we at IVL did together with the Swedish Defence Research Agency. I'm not going into detail of the study itself. It was published last month, so you can read about the, the results. But so what we did was that we measured radiated noise from 7 motorboats and a jet ski in a coastal area just outside here in the Gullmars Fjord on the Swedish west coast. And you will hear recordings first and last. There will be background noise, and then in the upper row there are vessels traveling at 15 knots, and in the lower row they are traveling at 5 knots. So let's hear what it sounds like. I hope the file works. Okay, so which animals are affected by all this vessel noise then? Well, a lot of marine animals use acoustic cues to communicate and also for a lot of different behaviors. And a lot of these behaviors have direct implications for survival and fitness of the animals. So it can be for foraging, for mate selection, to find and recognize conspecific, to avoid predators and other dangers, or for example, for navigation and orientation. And all these behaviors can be disturbed and disrupted by noise pollution. And vessel noise is mainly in the lower frequency range. Typically, the main intensity is below 1 kilohertz. And this overlaps in frequency with a hearing range of several different marine animal groups. So marine mammals, they generally have a broader hearing range, whereas fish and also the invertebrates that have been invested so far, they are primarily sensitive to sounds in the lower frequency range. So below 500 hertz and sometimes up to a few kilohertz. And mammals and some fish species, for example, cod and herring, they perceive sound through sound pressure. But all fish and also the investigated invertebrates so far have been shown to be detecting mainly the particle motion part of the sound. And benthic species, they possibly also detect substrate-borne vibration. And the environmental impacts of vessel noise, that is something that it's a research field that has grown in recent years. And initially, most of the focus was on marine mammals, and I would say it still is. So mainly porpoises and whales and animals that are known to use communication, sound for communication. But today we know that a lot of also other animals use they are affected by noise pollution, such as fish. And in recent years, there have also been an increasing number of studies showing effects on invertebrates. However, the total proportion of studies on invertebrates is still relatively small, and there are lots of knowledge gaps that remain. And I will give you some numbers of examples of effects that have been found for different species. But if you want to read in more detail, we did a report last year where most of these examples come from. You can read if you want more information. So underwater noise can mask natural biologically relevant acoustic cues. It means that animals can miss or they can misinterpret cues that or sounds that they otherwise would use for communication or for different behaviors. And for example, in the Gobi, masking of acoustic cues was found for males. They produced fewer courtship calls, and also females were less likely to spawn in a noisy condition. And when it comes to European sturgeon, also when they were close to ships, it was seen that they produce less of spawning sounds. The European lobsters instead, here males produce a low frequency buzzing sound, and in noisy environments where lots of ship noise in the area, it was seen that male lobster produce more of these agnostic sound calls. And this is probably because they do this vocal compensation for the masking of the calls. Fish like cod and haddock have been shown that they need to swim closer together to be able to communicate. And this is something that I think Karen will talk about later on. A lot of behavioral effects have been shown for both fish and invertebrates, and a lot of these have direct implications for the survival and fitness. For example, vessel noise may induce flight or anti-predator responses. And this has been shown, for example, in cuttlefish, where they start to change color patterns of the body and inking and jetting at noise levels. But noise can also impair anti-predator responses so that the animals react more slowly, maybe they hide less, and also they might be eaten more often. And this has been shown, for example, in eel and herring, gobies, lobsters, crabs, and prawns. Noise can, or vessel noise can also impair foraging or just make the animals feed less. And this has been shown for several species. And in perch in roach, for example, it's been shown that they hide more. They are more immobile instead of foraging when they are exposed to motorboat noise. And in bluefish tuna, it's been seen that if they are close to a ship, they alter their schooling behavior and swimming behavior. And like I told before, for the gobies, but also for shore crabs, vessel noise has been shown to affect courtship behaviors and reduce the mating success. A lot of marine invertebrates, they use acoustic cues to find suitable habitats to settle. And vessel noise has been shown to trigger this larval settlement. And in hermit crabs, it's been shown that they have a not so good ability to assess shell quality, and they choose shells of less quality if there is vessel noise. And the Norway lobster, but also a small amphipod that lives in the sediment, and brittle stars and lugworms, it's been shown that noise reduce their burrowing behavior and biotubation of the sediments. And this in turn can then affect the oxygenation of the seabeds. Vessel noise can also induce more general physiological and cellular stress responses. This could be increased levels of stress hormones, stress protein levels, could induce oxidative stress and also change metabolism. Both increased and decreased metabolism have been shown, and also reduced growth. And this has been shown in several, both fish and invertebrate species, and even DNA damage has been shown in blue mussels. And for cod, it's been shown that they have a reduced reproductive success and also disturbed larval development. So reduced egg production, reduced fertilization rate, and number of viable embryos. And the larvae that survive could also be in poorer conditions, and they're actually more easily caught by predators. And similar response or effects have been seen in cuttlefish, however, not when they are exposed to ship noise, but instead drilling. And juvenile shore crabs, it's been shown that if they are exposed to ship noise, they have a reduced ability to change, well, to camouflage by changing the color of the shell. And this effect is seen when they're exposed to ship noise, but not when they're exposed to a natural noise of similar intensity, the loud control that you see here. And noise could also induce physical injury, so acoustic trauma, damage to the sensory system, or hearing loss. And this has been shown for different cephalod species, however, not when they're exposed to vessel noise, but instead mainly after exposure to impulsive noise and also drilling. So there are lots of different effects, and there are different differences between species, but there could also be large differences of sensitivity within a species, and this may depend on the sex of, on also life stages. So early life stages are generally more sensitive than the adults are. And also the context and the time of the year could have large effects. So animals could be much more sensitive during the reproductive season and during migration, for example. And it also depends on whether the animals have been exposed to the sound, the specific sound before. If they have been able to gotten used to a specific sound, they could be less affected. And also some individuals are more shy and therefore could be more scared and more affected by underwater noise, while other individuals are more bold. So this could also influence the impacts. So underwater noise is an environmental problem that has received quite a lot of attention lately, but there are still, of course, many knowledge gaps that remain. And for example, we need to know more about the noise levels that are out there in the sea, particularly noise levels in sensitive coastal areas. And we also still don't know which ones are the most sensitive species, and also which are the most sensitive life stages. Where are the bottlenecks for each species? And also which are the most effective or sensitive effect parameters. And also for a lot of these effects, we don't know. We know that there is an effect, but we don't know the threshold levels. Where do the negative effects start to occur? And this is something that is very important. So we need like dose response relationships to be able to. This is very important for risk assessment of pollutants and stressors. And I've shown a lot of examples of effects, and they are then mainly on individual level, but we also need to link effects on the individual level to long-term effects on populations. And of course, we need to know which are the most efficient mitigation measures, not only to reduce the noise levels, but to reduce the negative impacts of the noise on the environment. But it is undoubtedly that underwater noise from both ships and motorboats can have severe and sometimes irreversible effects. And they can have it on a wide range of marine animals, so not only on marine mammals. And to be able to do more comprehensive risk assessment of underwater noise, it is very important that we consider also fish and invertebrates. And if I just should mention some mitigation measures that could be used to reduce environmental impact, of course, speed reductions, and also to establish protected areas, for example, by rerouting or avoiding specific areas during specific time periods, and also technical development, but also regular just maintenance of the engines, the propellers, and the boat hulls to get more silent ships and boats. And it's also very important to raise the awareness of the impacts of underwater noise to the public and to the industry. And this is very important to motivate implementation of different guidelines and also to increase the acceptance of new legislation, for example, or incentives, but also for voluntary measures. So finally, I will just very briefly mention work that is ongoing that we are doing within a project called DMASK. DMASK is an Interreg North Sea project on the development and evaluation of noise management strategies to keep the North Sea healthy. It's a three-year project that started this year, and it's run by Niels Kinnigan in the Netherlands. And within DMASK, we are currently, at the moment, we have developed a sensitivity scoring system to identify species that are most vulnerable to the effects of underwater noise. And we are just in the process of selecting different so-called indicator species that can be used for risk assessment for different policy scenarios and mitigation strategies. And we do this for fish and for invertebrates and for mammals to get a more comprehensive assessment. So I just wanted to mention this work. It's ongoing. We will hopefully have a report and a publication ready by early next year. So by that, I thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna-Sara. If I think we do have a little bit of time, because I see there's one question in the Q&A now. I want to also remind to everyone, all of the participants, that you can use the Q&A and you can submit there your questions. Either we can discuss them now with the experts, or as we said later on in the panel discussion, we will raise all of your questions. So Anna-Sara, we have a question here saying, thank you for a very interesting talk. Could you please clarify how the impact of underwater noise depends on the personality of individual fish? Or did I misunderstand? I think you mentioned somewhere.
Yeah, when it comes to the personality, is this fact that some individuals are, for example, they are more shy. So an individual that is shy could be much more easily scared than another individual of the same species that is a more bold individual. So that is an example of individual differences within a species. But then, of course, we also have differences between individuals of different sex and of different, for example, adults and larvae and so on. But also within, what should I say, like females of a certain age of a certain species, there could be quite large differences also between specific individuals. I don't know if that, I hope that clarified it.
Yeah, I think that is very interesting to hear, and I don't think we really consider those factors, but it is really interesting to hear. Thank you once again. Now we're gonna move on to our next presentation and our next expert. So we have Okko with us. Okko is working at the Finnish Environmental Institute in Finland, and he will present on impact of moderately frequent boat noise on early development of zebrafish. Okko, if you are ready, you can start.
Yeah, I'm good. Can you hear my audio?
Yes.
And can you see the presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Okko Outinen. I'm a researcher with the Finnish Environment Institute, and today my short talk will be on our ongoing project, as well as more closely to the impact of moderately frequent vessel noise on early development of the zebrafish. So that's something that I was gonna briefly talk about today. First, we'll look into our project background, what we're aiming to do there. In the Finnish marine coastal waters, there is an quite a unique sea area called the Archipelago Sea. So we'll look at a little bit how's the vessel traffic in that sea area throughout the year. Then we'll look at some results, and I'm going to highlight that these are still preliminary results on behavioral responses during early development of the zebrafish. And at the end, we're going to talk about what do our preliminary results mean and what are the future implications. So a quick background to our National Biodiversity Life IP project. It goes for 8 years, so it is quite long. It is perhaps the biggest Finnish national collaborative efforts, and it is aligned with UN CBD and EU biodiversity targets, aiming to protect at least 30% of the Finnish marine areas by 2030. So the project has a lot of work packages and actions and so on. And one of the actions mainly looks into underwater noise. And there we want to use this Archipelago Sea as a pilot area for underwater noise measurements and modeling. And then in the same sub-action, Separately, we do lab and field studies exposing different organisms to underwater noise, mainly vessel noise, and then we're detecting behavioral and physiological stress responses. And at least the organisms that we're working with is blue mussels, zebrafish, and three-spined sticklebacks. So this is our pilot study area. It's in the southwestern corner of Finland. In the map, you can see quite a bit of blue and black lines. So those are the main commercial shipping lanes of the area. And then in addition to that, the sea area has a lot of boating lanes, a lot of ferry lanes, which you can see in the smaller sort of green and dotted red lines in the map. And this is the area that we have been deploying hydrophones at quite a lot. We will be still doing these measurements until the end of summer next year. And it must be also said that the sea area is quite unique. It's very shallow and it has a lot higher biodiversity in the marine areas when we compare it to other Finnish coastal sea areas. For example, the Gulf of Finland and also the more northern coastal sea areas. So in the context of this presentation, what we mean by moderately frequent vessel noise, so the noise that we exposed the zebrafish embryos and larvae at, is that we took the very first 2023 hydrophone recordings, and we also took ship AIS stamps from the same area in the Archipelago Sea. And using these information, we constructed a realistic 24-hour noise exposure to the zebrafish. This 24-hour file, we divided into 8 hours of nighttime, where we assumed zero laser boat traffic and detected a mean of 3.75 ship passages per hour in the top 25% of the busiest hours during night. And the rest of the 16 hours left in the 24 hours, we consider daytime. And here, from our hydrophone recordings, we detected that the hydrophone that was on specifically on a boating lane and nowhere near a shipping lane, we calculated a mean of 7.5 boat passages per hour in the top 25% of the busiest hours during day. And I hope you get the idea what we were thinking about. So basically what we did that even from our even more previous recordings, we detected that a boat passage in the Finnish coastal areas lasts about 30 to 60 seconds when the SPL in the 125 hertz third octave band is above 110 dB. So we took a graph on that, did 1 minute averages of SPL throughout the 2-month deployment time, and we detected the number of boat passages using these assumptions. So based on these data, assumptions, and calculations, a 24-hour noise file was constructed where boat and ship passages were randomized into blocks, understanding the reality that on some occasions, individual passages may overlap. So here in the picture, you can see the first 16 hours, which is the daytime. So there are randomized number of boat passages put in different intervals, 7.5 passages per hour on average. And then the last 8 hours, we have just above 3 ship passages per hour on average for the last 8 hours. Ideally, the daytime exposure would include both ship passages and boat passages, but since our hydrophone recording, the one that we used, was specifically from a boating lane, we really wanted to emphasize the impact of that into the zebrafish embryos and larvae during the sort of daytime exposure. So the test species, why we selected zebrafish as our very first test species, is that it has been widely used as an aquatic reference species for many kinds of impact assessments under lab conditions regarding many anthropogenic stressors. So not just underwater noise, but also underwater noise has been used on zebrafish in the past. So we have a reference point somewhere. Zebrafish have two organs to sense sound pressure: inner ear and the lateral line. And based on earlier studies, we detected that they are sensitive to sounds. Adults up to 4 kilohertz and larvae up to 1200 hertz. So what we did is that we put some individuals, zebrafish, fertilized embryos into a tank, quite a small tank, about 40 liters. Exposed them the 24-hour moderately frequent noise file for 5 days in a row. So during this time, zebrafish embryos actually hatch into larvae. And then after 5 days post-fertilization, that's when we took them and put them into it's a device that is specifically made for detecting zebrafish behavior, but also other organisms can be put there. It's called Dania Vision. And after the exposure, it detects with cameras, it detects zebrafish swimming behavior and movement under a camera in very small wells. And then and the 45 to 60-minute observation period includes acclimatization and several dark and light cycles. And I hope this video works. That's what it roughly looks like with the Dania Vision when it's observing the movement in very small wells. I think that's probably good enough. And as measures of activity, the Dania Vision device measures distance moved and velocity. And here are our preliminary results that we have from the 5-day exposure. Noise exposed individuals compared to the silent control individuals. And even though I say these results are preliminary because they are from our first set of experiments, I do want to highlight that we have repeated these experiments a couple of times and the result has been always the same. So we do definitely trust that even if you look at distance moved, silent control individuals versus noise exposed, we can see that the noise exposed individuals move much less. Same goes with velocity. So here, the first 15 minutes, you can see the acclimatization period. And then when the light is turned off, that's when both curves go up since they start to move in the dark. And then here are the light-dark cycles. So when you deploy light, they don't like to move as much in the light. So then the movement as well as the velocity goes down in both occasions. but clearly the silent control individuals move much more. We have done also shorter experiments where we observed zebrafish larvae during, so this Dania vision experiment is after the noise exposure. But we have done also smaller or shorter experiments where we observe zebrafish larvae during the noise exposure, and we can see the same thing. The noise exposed individuals barely move at all. So future implications, I'm going to run through these because I know I'm running out of time soon. Underwater noise certainly has a behavioral impact on early development of zebrafish. From these same individuals, we have also taken samples for gene expression and physiological stress responses, but we do not have those results yet. So we also want to look at if there's other impacts than behavior. As said, it is an eight-year project, so we're going to do some other similar experiments in the lab and in the field, also for blue mussels and the 3-spun sticklebacks. And for blue mussels, we have already done some of those, and all of those results are not ready yet. Even though we wanted to construct a realistic noise exposure scenario, we understand that when we test these individuals and we introduce sound to a relatively small tank, this underwater noise exposure becomes less realistic, and the acoustic signature of our noise exposure changes quite a bit. So this is a challenge. There are also good things for measuring zebrafish and using zebrafish for other for studies, but this is definitely a weakness. So especially the new studies next year and the year after that, we aim to look at doing them under field conditions. And when we have done all our experiments, we want to, of course, look at how to mitigate vessel noise to reduce impacts. And here in the same project, we are specifically looking at speed reductions and time area restrictions to see that how much do these measures really reduce noise in the coastal areas and specifically the archipelago sea. I think I ran out of time, so that would be all. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Thank you, Oko. Thank you for sharing your results with us as well. We have one question for you in the chat from Julia. She's saying, very interesting, Oko. How do you produce and control the exposure in the tank?
So we just use an underwater speaker to introduce the sound file or the noise file that I just briefly showed. But like I said, it's a small 40-liter tank, and the acoustic signature of the individual boat or ship passages changes a lot. One thing I forgot to say is that the original sound file, which is based on our recordings where we took ship and boat passages and then we put them into the file is not loud in the sense of how much there is the median noise levels for the 24 hours. It's not loud at all. I think the median noise levels were 85 dB. But then, yes, when we introduce the same file into a tank, it does change. It does not get much louder, but the acoustic signature changes. And this is a challenge for us. It makes our noise exposure much less realistic, but at least we get the frequency of individual ship and boat passages. At least we can expose that into the organisms, even if the acoustic signature changes quite a bit.
Thank you for clarifying that. I hope this answers your question, Julia. And regarding the other question that we have in the chat, I think that is the one made before for Anna Sarah. Well, I want to say to all of our presenters for today, if you see a question in the chat that is directly regarding your presentation, you can also maybe answer it in the Q&A, like writing down later on, even if a question comes later. At this point, I don't see any other questions directly for Oko. And I think we're very much on time, so I'm very happy about that. And thank you both for keeping the time. I think for now, I'm gonna keep my promise to you all, and we're gonna have a short 10-minute break. Hope everyone had some time to recharge a little bit, maybe grab some quick coffee. We will now continue with our third presentation. Our third guest speaker is Karen de Jong. Karen is currently working on the Institute of Marine Research in Norway, and her presentation will be about impact of anthropogenic noise on cod from a fish communication perspective. Karen, I would now ask you to start your presentation.
Hey. Yes.
Hello.
Sorry, it took a while to find out how to turn on my camera. Yeah, so I'll share my presentation. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
But-
I'm just gonna have to need you to put yes, full screen. Great, amazing.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me to this seminar. I would like to talk about our work on anthropogenic noise on cod from a fish communication perspective. Yes, so I work at the Institute of Marine Research, and our main focus is research and monitoring and advice for the sustainable use of resources from the marine environment. We started to be interested in noise already in 1996, well, before that, but because the fishermen started to ask whether the seismic surveys would affect their catch rate. And this has resulted in a paper where they showed that actually cod and haddock seem to be avoiding seismic surveys, and this effect can last up to 20 nautical miles from the source. And this is one of the earliest papers on behavioral effects. And that's kind of how IMR got into this field. Nowadays, we know that almost all marine animals can hear, and we as humans are making a lot of noise, especially in the frequencies where fish hear, for example. So that was just to show a low frequency sound, which would be around here, and a high frequency sound. And on the x-axis is the frequency. And then you see that all our noise sources, a lot of them are actually in the lower frequencies that are very important for fish. This is, for example, seismic shots. Boats, piling, wind farm, and all this can really impact animals, especially in their daily behavior. And this is an example of gobies that are very tiny fish in marine fish. And in their case, the male that is sitting here, I hope you see my mouse, but the male is sitting in this little burrow, and the male is trying to convince the female to come and lay her eggs with him. And as you can see, it's a sound, or as you can hear, sound seems to be really important in this process. And it's thought to attract females and also to synchronize the spawning events. And we've also shown that continuous sound can actually affect mating success in different species of gobies. This is on the left, you see an example of the painted goby. And here we found that in continuous noise, males get less eggs from females. And in another study, they've shown that actually it goes mainly for continuous noise as well. Intermittent noise seems to have less of an effect on the spawning readiness. And then we get to cod, and cod also produce sound during the spawning. So here you see the courtship behavior of cod, where they swim together. And if you hear carefully, you can hear the grunt-like sounds. And in a meta-analysis we did to see whether this was something general, we actually found that for psychological stress responses, it was most important whether a sound was irregular versus regular, because potentially because this is more predictable for the animal. But for behavioral stress responses, it's actually the continuous irregular noises, as you see here, that had the most significant effects in the literature. And from this, we started the spawn size project. You hear the cat in the background, sorry. And this, the video you saw before came from this spawn size project, where we actually studied the effect of seismic sound on spawning cod, both in the field and in the lab. And this project was led by Lise Sefla at IMR. The field studies were based on cod telemetry, and this is when you have sensors standing out in the field, and you put a little transponder in the belly of a fish that sends out the signal. And the receivers can pick up the signal, and then from that you can figure out where the cod is and how fast it's moving, for example. And this was done at Austevoll, which is, if you see on the right side here is Norway, and Austevoll is on the west coast, close to Bergen, and there we had a test site with a telemetry array and a reference site. And this has been in use since 2019 and has been used after to test different sound sources as well. And as I explained, you can get fish presence and positions, and also depth and acceleration. So that allows us to study behaviors of free-ranging cod. If you see on the right, you can follow an individual through the bay. So we can look at space use, displacement, swimming depth, and activity levels. And because it's in the field, it also allows us to use real sound sources, which increases the realisticity of the exposure. And what we've used till now is air guns as part of the SPON-size project, and also marine vibrator, which is actually used. So air guns are used to study whether there's study the sea bottom and locate, for example, oil by giving loud blasts of sound. So this is an impulsive and intermittent sound. The marine vibrator is developed to actually produce less loud sound, but to still get enough information about the sea bottom, it's therefore continuous. And we wanted to study whether this had an effect on the cod. And then we also studied sparker sources and other low frequency sounds, such as boat noise. And when you put all those results together, we found actually that the marine vibrator had the most effect on the behavior. And our hypothesis was that this was because it's a continuous sound source. We did have the same source level for sound level in the bay for the air guns and the marine vibrator. So of course, air guns are in real life much louder than the marine vibrator. So this may compensate some of the direct effect. And within SPON-size, we also did a netband study where we could more detailed look at the behavior of the cod. This is the work package I was leading. And do you see this? Wait, sorry. And there was the question, like, if they don't really leave the area because of the seismic, does it still affect reproduction? So we looked at courtship behavior, reproductive success, and the timescale of a potential effect. And here we actually use a smaller air gun, so the level is comparable to a seismic survey at 20 nautical miles away approximately, and we rode it back and forth through the bay to get something comparable to a seismic survey that will be further away and closer by from a specific fish population. We had 8 exposures in 2019 and 3 in 2020 because we were cut short by COVID. So the first question, does seismic sound affect cod behavior? And here you see the net pens that you also saw in the first video. And then when you hear the shot, you see that the fish immediately react. And this we also saw in the other net pen. Oh, yeah, well. But we only saw this first clear behavior. After that, we didn't see any clear effects of behavior. And also when we looked at the spawning success, because we collected the eggs at the end, we didn't see any clear effects of seismic. So what you see here is black is the before period, red is during seismic exposure, and green is after. And we put the blue line to show that it's, of course, a general trend over the season. And you don't see, there were no clear significant effects of seismic on spawning success. However, when we looked closer at courtship behavior, we also added the passing boats that were kind of passing the area anyway, so we included it in the analysis after the fact. We found that if you look, for example, at signal duration, there's no clear effect. This is before seismic, during seismic, and after seismic. There's no clear effect of seismic on the calling behavior of cod, but we do see a clear effect of boat noise, where the signal duration was actually less long during boat noise compared to in periods without boat noise, both before, during, and after the seismic survey. So the conclusions we can draw from this research till now is that for cold continuous noise may be actually more disturbing than impulsive noise. And this could in particular be during reproductive communication, where they need to interact with sound, and potentially impulsive noise gives silent periods where they could still communicate. Well, the continuous boat noise gives a lot less of these silent periods. However, the question is then, of course, what is continuous? Because boat noise are also periodic. So there will be silent periods in between. So it may be that they can still compensate, but it will get harder the more continuous the sound is. Yes. Thanks a lot, and please let me know if there's any questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. I think that right now I don't see any questions yet in the chat, but I'm gonna give a little bit of time to the participants if they want to ask something directly to you now that we have a few minutes. I also want to say very interesting videos, very, very important for us as well to get the perception a little bit of what it happens for fish, right? Because I don't think we really get into the perception of how they perceive the world. So it's very nice to hear that. I see a comment here. Argon noise does get continuous in deep water due to multipaths.
Yeah, thanks. That's a very good comment. I didn't mention that. But of course, yeah, that's also a very interesting part, that at 20 nautical miles, depending on the area, it will be either continuous or intermittent, depending on the reflections of the noise. So it's always, yeah, it's very important to realize what will happen to the sound on as you get to the actual fish. So you have to look at received source levels rather than, yeah, the source of the sound.
Thank you for clarifying. And there's another question asking, did you see if the fitness of pod born under noise is less or not?
No, we didn't have a chance to look at that. We didn't. Yeah.
That's fair. And another one coming in. Thank you for the talk. When you're taking measurements of the cod, saying I think it was cod, response in the field with exposing them to noises. How do you deal with noise that is already there?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So in the air gun exposures, the air gun is a lot louder than all the other noise. So we have blocks with air gun and blocks without air gun, and we can compare those blocks and assume that the other sources of noises will be the same for the different blocks. So that it's the additive effect of the exposure in an environment where, of course, there's already other types of noises around.
Great. I hope this clarifies it. And then another one for the vibration study. Could you comment on the magnitude of concern for the statement? For code, continuous noise may be more disturbing than impulsive noise. Disturbing to what degree? To what extent? None, minor, moderate, or severe? Do the behavioral observations impact the population?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that's something we always want to study, but it's hard to actually get there. What we do at IMR is that we generally look at behaviors And then we focus on crucial behaviors to survival, such as reproduction. So therefore, we assume that if this is affected in a strong way, this will lead to population level effects. But as you saw in the spawn size project, at 145 dB, we see no clear effect on reproductive success, even though we see slight change, and no clear changes in behavior on the longer term. We see slight changes in behavior on the short term, but no clear behavioral effects on the long term. And this is also why in our advice, we kind of say if the seismic is below 100, we now open up for seismic companies to show that when they shoot at a certain distance from a spawning area, that they won't affect the animals inside the spawning area with more than 145 dB, and then it would be, we assume it wouldn't lead to population and level effects. So at the moment we are using this 145 dB as a sort of low, the level of least of beginning effect, which is kind of the threshold at which you start to see effect. But of course, this has to be more carefully studied because it's really hard to decide on such a threshold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that makes sense, of course. And thank you for that. We have one final question. I think we can also make it for this one. Continuous sound and offshore wind. Any insights or thoughts?
Yes, so because we see that continuous noise seems to be more of an issue for reproduction than impulsive noise, we are worried especially about the fish that stay in the wind farm. And this is, again, especially a concern for cod that may be attracted to wind farms. So we are currently running some experiments where we also look at whether cod from close by spawning grounds are actually attracted to a wind farm in Norway, and whether these then also will spawn there or not. But it's it's ongoing research. So at the moment I can't give any conclusions, but we see from other countries, it's of course that cod are really attracted and are feeding in wind farms, but we don't yet know how disturbed they really are by the noises inside the wind farms.
Okay. I think we still have two more questions, but unfortunately we'll have to move on for now. But I'm gonna ask you if you can, Karen, to briefly reply to those. You can type your answers in the Q&A. Thank you again for your wonderful presentation. And now we will move on to our fourth and final presentation for today. We have with us Nina Morer. She works in the Institute of Terrestrial and Aquatic Wildlife Research, Germany. And Nina will present on assessing the impact of vessel slowdowns in common roach and sand goby. I already see you, Nina, so that is great.
Right, thank you so much. Oh, I hope you can see my screen.
Yes,
yeah.
it's perfect.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Nina, and as was just mentioned, I'm working in the north of Germany at the Institute for Terrestrial and Aquatic Wildlife Research in the working group of telemetry and acoustics, and we assess the impact of a possible vessel slowdown in common roach and sand goby. So I think we've already got a really nice introduction today of continuous noise sources in the Baltic Sea. And one of the most spread one is vessel noise. You can see here on the right with a map of the AIS data in the Baltic. And there was a lot of really great examples of detrimental effects on marine life that vessel noise has. So obviously there's talk about possible measures to reduce this underwater radiated noise. So mostly there's three approaches that have been proposed. And one of them would be a rerouting of vessel traffic, so the separation of animals and vessels in space of time. And as far as I'm concerned, this has not been done due to noise levels or problems with that. But it has been done due to collision risk. So off the coast of Greece, for example, a lot of sperm whales are usually sighted that you can see here in red, and then the AIS data of the vessels is in blue in the background. And we have in yellow the recommended rerouting of the vessel traffic. And it's nice to say that this has been done on a voluntary basis in 2022 to reduce vessel collision risk with sperm whales, I think up to 75% already. That was possible, I think, mostly because it doesn't have any negative effect for the shipping companies, so no more cost of fuel that they have to take. But to actually separate animals and vessels in rerouting, you do need to have like a very intense habitat knowledge to not cause more harm than anything else. So therefore, at the moment, most of the time, the focus is on reducing source levels with slowdowns or also technological changes that has been mentioned today here before. And it's again, really large marine mammals, as they're a very good poster child for that. It has been applied for killer whales in Canada with the ECHO project, where a voluntary vessel slowdown has had great success. So what do we actually gain from a vessel slowdown? Just to break this up really quickly. So we have vessels that have a high speed and a slower speed. And what we get is actually a reduced source level. So as you can see on the graph on the right, the faster a ship is, the higher the source level also gets. And that directly impacts the impact area of that ship. So the higher the source level, also the area is larger that where the noise source is audible. So I think there's a lot of modeling that has been happened, and they found that actually a vessel slowdown reduces almost all impacts concerning the noise, despite the longer time that a slower vessel takes to pass. So one of the frequently invoked concerns is about a slowdown is that the resulting reduction in source level could possibly be offset by the longer time that a ship spends within the habitat, and therefore causes a longer amount of time that an animal is exposed to that. So in our study, we wanted to see if it is actually more harmful to expose fishes to a louder noise for a shorter time period or a quieter noise for a longer time period. So there's a wide variety of hearing sensitivities in fish. So we can start with fish that only that don't have a swim bladder and they're only sensitive to particle motion. And then there's also fish that have a swim bladder and they have a connection to the inner ear, and they're actually also sensitive to sound pressure. So in our study, we picked 2 species. So common roach, they do have a swim bladder that is connected with ossicles, and they're sensitive up to 5,000 hertz. And then we picked sand gobies, and they are sensitive up to 1,000 hertz due to them not having a hearing accessory, but they do have a swim bladder. So to actually evaluate possible impacts that a slowdown could have on fish, we tested if a reduction in the source level while maintaining a similar cumulative sound exposure level has different effects. And in our case, we were interested in behavior and in hearing for our 2 fish species. And for that, we used broadband noise up to 10 kilohertz in a lab setting. We used 3 different treatments. So we had our fast ship that you can see here in red with an overall SPL of 164. That is for the whole broadband noise. And then the slow ship with a 3 dB reduction, as this seemed feasible for most ship types to actually apply. Both treatments had a similar cell cum, so the sound exposure level throughout the time was the same due to the slow ship being there for a longer time. So to assess behavior in both species, we actually had a setup in our lab. So we had a big IBC tank, and then we had our setup in there with an arena that was filmed from above with the camera here. We had it illuminated from the bottom and our speaker outside of the arena, so we could observe the animals. And then mid-trial, we had a predator released, so we could test if crucial behaviors such as anti-predator responses would be impacted by either the noise being louder or quieter. And here you can see one of the videos that we took where you can see our fish in the arena, and then you can see the predator being released and the fish reacting to that. Then afterwards, we used the fish to assess their auditory evoked potentials to see if they had any kind of threshold shift due to our noise exposure, as we were interested if it had an effect on that. So if we move on to our results, we can see here for common roach, I used a video analysis to measure the mean distance to other individuals. And you can see here in our control setting, you have the baseline, and the pre-predator is very, very similar, as there was no noise exposure whatsoever. And then you can see a reduction in the distance to others when the predator was released, so the post-predator phase over here. So the animals reacted to the predator and stayed closer together. This was not so visible in both of the exposure phases treatments. So you can see that the animals kind of did not react in a similar way to the control. So they did not apply their usual anti-predator behavior. And then in Goby, in them, I checked the mean distance that they moved in total. So you can see that gobies actually showed a freezing reaction towards the predator in all 3 treatments. So for them, it was completely irrelevant if there was noise or not for the predator response. And then if we can look at their hearing abilities, so you can already see that gobies on the right, they're a lot less sensitive than the common roach, as you can see here, that goes a lot lower. And for sand goby, we also did not test 2000 hertz, as they're just not able to sense it anymore. And you can see that our past exposure, so the red curve over here, actually did elicit a significant hearing threshold shift after the past exposure at 250 hertz and 1000 hertz, while in goby there was just a small shift at 125 hertz, but we were not able to test lower frequencies for them due to our speaker limitations. So for a conclusion, for our experiments, you can say that a possible reduction in the source level could mitigate the effects on the auditory insensitive fish, although we did not see any effects in gobies. And it could also, it doesn't have a mitigating effect on the noise-induced behavioral changes. We did see that gobies reacted towards the predator either way, while roach reacted differently, but we did not assess long-term data, so we do not know if I would actually stay like that for a longer time or not. But for them, it technically would not be a difference if the shift was slower or faster. It would just change the hearing threshold shift for them. Yeah, so for future research, it should be investigated if multiple vessel passages, so multiple exposures, would actually have varying effects. And then also if long-term effects would still apply to them. So if like maybe for multiple days and multiple vessel passages, it would actually have varying effects. And then one of the main things that I think we've heard today already, it would be really relevant to actually test that in free-ranging fish, and also maybe with actual vessel passages, as lab settings make it really hard to imitate either vessel exposures or something like that. And then if you're interested in that, you can go check out the paper that we published on that in 2023 for more information. And then just to have a positive outlook on that, so we do see that voluntary vessel slowdowns have effects on the overall cumulative sound energy that is out there. But at the moment, there's incentives and governmental regulations are still needed. So also the Marine Strategy Framework Directive here in the EU, at the moment, they do not have any regulations for continuous noise reductions or mitigation measures. And another point is that the combination of mitigation measures could also result in reductions in cumulative noise levels. So as we've heard before, that continuous noise could also maybe be like a more problematic than we thought before, than like a shorter period of time and an impulsive noise could be. So maybe the combination of mitigation measures, so technical improvements and vessel slowdowns. So vessels would not necessarily stay there for a longer time, but we could have improved propellers or something similar. And that could then lead to lower source levels for animals in total. And then on a positive side, there is currently a focus shift. So we're not constantly, as researchers, having to fill in all the knowledge gaps that there still are. But the IMO is currently working on guidelines for shipping. So there's just like from the other side, something happening, which is very nice. And then there's recent projects where, for example, Saturn actually combined impact studies on animals and technical improvements. So you have biologists and engineers at the same table to actually discuss possible solutions and what is actually needed. So people are finally in dialogue with each other, which I think is very important. And also this webinar today is part of that, of course. And then another project I would like to mention is Diaphonia, where they currently work on diagnostic biomarkers. So these could possibly make it, make it possible to actually assess exposures in wild fish as they, show exposures in, I think, the ears as well. And then, I hope if we can assess possible mitigation measures that are actually working for animals such as fish and invertebrates and not just marine mammals, as a lot of the focus has been in the past years, we can maybe actually go off in a well-managed future where we either are able to reduce ship traffic, have quieter propellers, and actually have the mitigation measures that are needed at the moment. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think that now we don't have a question yet in the chat, but I think I want to address, there's a comment. Vessel slowdowns, bear in mind that the SEL is also lower. SEL takes time into account. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Ida.
Yeah, so we wanted to see if it actually makes a difference if the animals are exposed to the same SEL throughout that, to actually see if it would more be high noise in a shorter time or the lower noise for a longer time. But I think it depends on where the animal is, because I think if you're very, very close and you would have the same, very close exposure to that, it would still be very similar to that.
Okay, thank you. We also have someone, Peter is recommending a recent large study on impulsive sound in fish by the Australian Institute of Marine Research. I think that our participants can also click on the link and later on further continue reading. There's also a question for you. Thank you a lot for your presentation. May I ask why the common roach and sandy goby were selected for this study?
Yeah, so we picked them because they're quite different in their hearing sensitivities, and it's species that are very present here in our area. So we wanted to use fish that people could actually apply to our area here.
Okay, that makes sense. That's pretty clear. Once again, thank you, Nina. And for now, we have concluded with our presentations, and we will move to the panel discussion. We will explore more in depth all of the concepts and all of the ideas that have been presented here today. So once more for now, I will give the floor to Bettina.
Thank you very much, Aliki. Just a quick comment beforehand. We seem to have problems with our internet here. It seems to shut off from time to time. So in case I freeze and I'm gone, Aliki will take over and hopefully we can go over this smoothly. But yeah, maybe it doesn't happen in the next 45 minutes. So could I ask the panelists to switch on their cameras?
Matthias here. I think
Yes.
I did it, but I can't see myself.
No, we can't see you either. Yeah, interesting. We saw you earlier.
Yes, I have not done anything since then.
Okay. Technical things. Well, we'll imagine that you're here and maybe it switches on at some point. Who knows? Thank you very much. So our panelists, you've already met Okko Uttinen, Karen de Young, and Nina Maura, who gave the presentations. So I think I don't need to introduce them anymore. But Matthias is new to the panel. Matthias is a Deputy Research Director at the Unit for Underwater Technology at FOI in Sweden. So he's been very involved in all the underwater noise topics for many years. He measures various sound sources in the sea and studies their environmental impact on marine animals, especially fish. So that's why we are very happy to have him here. And he's also a member of the expert groups, the technical group on underwater noise at the EU and also in EG Noise in HELCOM. So thank you very much for all of you to be here. We got some questions from you, the participants, beforehand, and we would like, so we basically had the panelists choose each of them one of the questions or topics generally, and we will start the panel discussion with a statement of each of the panelists. And after that, go on with either the questions that you have sent us or also like you have sent us beforehand, but also please feel free again to put questions in the Q&As that we will try to put into this discussion. We have about 40 minutes, so it's not a huge amount of time, but hopefully we can already cover quite a few things. So, Matthias, we can't see you, but we hear you, I think. So can I ask you to start with your first statement, which will look at the topic of the importance of standardization and what expert studies do we need to produce? What expert studies do we need to produce and to make them useful for standardization?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry again for the technical issues here. I heard you presented me earlier, and I have a background in marine fish ecology, and I've been working many years for actually doing some kind of a meta-analysis and producing information for regulators and also at EU level of thresholds to be used in regulatory systems. So we have seen quite a lot studies coming out. But when we do these kind of summaries and try to come up with threshold values, many studies has to be disregarded because they don't live up to some standard sometimes, or they don't use the terminology so we can compare one study to another. And this is really a problem that we spend so many projects and not thinking about how the data are going to be used by other scientists. How is the data? How is the study set up? What kind of resource question are we looking into? So I just want to like to highlight the importance of thinking about this when you both design a study and also write a paper. And I will add 3 links in the chat later on for 2 papers, one very recently coming out, suggesting how can we do this more of in an organized way so the data and results we are producing can be used to a wider audience. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Matthias. Yes, definitely a very important topic that we need to look at, especially also if we want to do assessments for bigger areas and want to have it comparable between nations, but also between regions. Next, I would like to ask Karen to tell us about which noise sources seem to be the most disturbing to fish and what mitigation measures could be suggested.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. That was a really interesting question. So as I've also shown in my presentation is that we have you get more of an indication that continuous noise may be more of an issue than impulsive noise for behavioral effects. And our reasoning to look at behavioral effects is that the physical effects of impulsive noise will generally only affect a very small part of the population, while behavioral effects will be because they respond to much lower noise levels, will be a much larger part of the population will be affected. But as I also said before, you always have to look at this perspective of the animal. So continuous noise sources may be intermittent from the perspective of the animal if they're passing ships, while, as mentioned before, seismic sound could become continuous at larger distances. So the important part, I think, is to actually monitor in the field and see how we can bring noise levels down at areas that we identify as specifically important, such as, for example, spawning sites of fish or migration routes, and look at mitigation measures that could actually reduce both noise levels, but maybe also increase the number of silent periods in those areas.
Thank you very much, Karen. I think that's a very interesting thought to look at the sources, not from our view, but from the view of the receiver. So what we see as the impulsive and the continuous sound is possibly different at the receiver end. Very interesting thought. Matthias, just quickly, the chat that you're using can only be seen by the panelists. So if you could put your links into the Q&A, then all the participants can also see it. Thank you.
I will do that. I just
Thanks.
mentioned that there's also an ISO group that works with underwater acoustics, and there's a link to those kind of groups. So there are some standards to be used, but some are working on as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, the next topic or next statements, we would like sort of continue a little bit on what Karen said at the end, the mitigation measures that we need to think about. And both Nina and Orko would like to say a few things about the challenges of introducing mitigation measures and what would be needed to address such challenges. So we'll be on the topic of mitigation measures. And Nina, I would ask you first.
So one of the main issues for the mitigation measures for continuous sound, I would say, is mostly in the incentives and also the legal part as well. I think Orko might focus a little bit more on the experimental side. So as we kind of see vessel noise as the most widespread continuous sound source, the MSFD in the EU is actually assessing and monitoring continuous noise in exactly that way. So they use annual trends of frequency bands that are centered at 63 and 125 hertz using AIS data. And at the moment, they're only referring to impacts of continuous sound towards masking. And I think that makes it very clear what also Karen said earlier, that behavior is also a very important part that is at the moment not considered at all. But one of the main challenges is, I think, that most of the thresholds that are currently, I think, already published in 2023, is that often they use soundscapes that are just modeled. So they're modeled based on AIS data. And animal-borne data from seals, for example, shows that only about 30% of vessel encounters can actually be linked to a nearby vessel. So we probably underestimate low frequencies to mid frequencies, which was, I think, validated in 2022 based on, in comparison to our monitoring and actual assessment. So that's one of the main problems, is that actually at the moment that governmental sites, they see our modeled continuous sound maps, and they are like never really exceeding possible thresholds actually impacting animals.
Thank you very much, Nina. Just another, so apparently the chat can be seen by everyone. Sorry, that was my mistake, Matthias, so no worries, you can continue putting things in that chat. And you have your hand raised.
Yes, just to mention a comment to Nina's is that the MSFD thresholds and background documents, they mention behavior reactions, and both in other countries, but also in the Baltic countries, there was thresholds for behavior in the wholeness assessment. So there are foundations where you can use that, but it's up to the regions, up to the countries to determine what thresholds to be used. So the framework is there.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Matthias. Okko, please.
Thank you. I'm having huge connection problems. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
we can hear you. At least I'm not the only one, it looks like.
Okay, good. I've been in and out of the meeting for 5 times at least. Anyway, I did hear what we were talking about, and we did briefly discuss this before. Mitigation measures, and the 2 measures that I mentioned during my presentation was speed reductions, mainly for recreational boats, so areas where there's only boating lanes, and then time area restrictions. In our project, there's another team that has looked into the actual legal aspects of actually assigning these mitigation measures. And speed reduction, to my knowledge, is something that you can, let's say, it's easier to apply to an area. But when it comes to time area restrictions, so let's say we are identifying an area that we want to preserve from human activity and vessel noise, for example, what our team started looking into what is needed to make sure it happens, that for a certain time of the year, for example, nobody is allowed to go to this area. So some challenges that they faced is that they need to figure out who owns the land in the islands and the coastal areas, and can you just assign an area, whatever kind of area you like, in some water or coastal area. And after looking into for quite a while, they came up with a map that has most coastal areas and islands, and some of them are privately owned, some of them are state owned, and things like that. But it's not just which areas you want to preserve. It is also a legal question. At least this is what the team in our project found out. I don't know if the same is true in all countries in the Baltic Sea or Europe or elsewhere.
Thanks a lot, Okko. Yes, I'm sure that is probably different in different countries. So that links actually to a question that was asked by a participant beforehand. Do you know of any areas where this is actually already practiced? And the person who asked the question was obviously new from Germany, because in Germany we have one very small area in the coastal zone. And it's interesting that you say that, Okko. I don't think this is privately owned ground in Germany. That would be sort of in the communal, in the communes or the local authorities. But interestingly, it took me a while to find out, because I couldn't figure it out for a long time, that this is for above water noise. So it's been actually made for humans. It, of course, helps the underwater noise to be less, but this restriction has been made for the humans who live near the coast to have less noise. So the question to you panelists, if you know of any other areas in Europe or bigger areas, maybe even outside of Europe, where either speed reductions or really quiet zones have been implemented. Yes, Karen, please.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's in southern Norway, and they have along the coast, they have a speed reduction. But that's mainly for recreational boats.
Is that in a certain marine protected area? Or is it just as...
I think it may be the whole coast. I would have to look this up. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Okko?
Yes, so there are areas in our coastal waters and also in the archipelago sea that are actually protected. At least some of them are protected for some time of the year. The rationale behind our project is the fact that not enough of sea area is protected, and we want to find out more areas to be protected in the future. But you are correct, Bettina, that especially some speed limits that we do have also in the archipelago sea, they are mainly related to safety.
Oh, I think we've lost Okko again. Oh, are you there?
I'm here. What
Yes,
did you hear?
okay. We heard related to safety, and then
Yeah, speed reductions are very often related to safety. So when there's something really narrow straight, that's there's a speed reduction. And what you said about areas being protected, yes, they are mainly protected for above water noise, for important breeding sites for and foraging sites for seabirds, marine birds, for example. But we are also, as I said in the presentation, in the same project, we are deploying hydrophones to boating lanes, and then we have a protected area in that specific area that's about 200 meters outside of the boat lane. And then there's like this very shallow bay that is in the protected area. It's protected from April until September every year, so we're not allowed to go there. So we're actually looking into how quiet is it there underwater. But yeah, areas are protected. There are some measures, but they are mainly for other reasons than underwater noise.
thank you, Okko. Yeah, there's also in the a comment in the chat that speed restrictions and zoning are in place for the approach to Boston Harbor, primarily to try to avoid ship strikes for the North Atlantic right whales. So here again, it is about ship strikes. So it seems like, but I mean, if we have other reasons to do the speed reductions, that's fine, as long as we reduce the underwater noise. Matthias, you did have your hand up and took it down again. Is there another comment you would like to make?
No, we can continue, please.
Okay, thanks. So there are links in both chats, in the Q&A and in the normal chat. So please look at that to all participants that relate to things that have been said before. I have a question because we've looked, so that also comes from a participant who put it in beforehand. We have looked now at impacts that can be on behavior, that can be on reproduction. But the question here is if there are investigations, if busy fairways, either for ships or recreational boats, have sort of a barrier effect on fish. So would that interfere with their migration path or so? Do you know anything about this? Seems like no one.
Yeah, I can
Yeah?
say that that's a very interesting question, and that we would really like to look into it, but it's very hard to do because you need to actually follow fish during their migration.
Yeah, true. Matthias?
Yes, this is not regarding shipping, but I was part of a eel tagging study looking at wind farm noise and electromagnetic effects. So we tagged, or the scientists tagged eels swimming through one of the wind farms in southern Sweden. And it's very difficult to know what they stopped for, but there was some indication that they were hesitated to get into the wind farm area for, I think in average, maybe 30 minutes in total of their whole journey. So it was quite small. But eels are not really that good in hearing, so it might more have been the cables maybe they were hesitating to pass over, but they could detect a small hesitation to go through an offshore wind farm. Noise, electromagnetic fields, we don't know. But I agree with Karen that this is one of those topics one really would like to look at, but the experiments to study are quite complex. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that also it links to another question that was posed, and that basically touches on that subject. When do we know when the effect actually comes from underwater noise or from other stress if we do it in the field and not in a contained environment? Of course, that is a big problem, I think, and that sort of goes into the same direction. Nevertheless, even though we have a lot of obstacles and a lot of problems in this, I think it still is important that we go forward in these questions that we have to be able to at least step by step answer some questions and continue monitoring it and changing it and making it better. I have two questions here. One is for Karen. You in your presentation, you suggested already a certain lobe, and I think this is a word for those who are in underwater noise assessment work and so on. So an abbreviation, the level of onset of adverse biological effects. That is very important because this is what we need to define to be able to do the assessment and to fill those thresholds that we have in the regionals. So do we know, or do you know of any other possible lobes for other fish? Do we think cod is a good species for the Baltic to use, seeing that cod stocks are collapsing? And which other species would otherwise be good if we don't use that one? So maybe first to you, Karen, as you already suggested, a lobe. And otherwise, maybe the other panelists would like to continue on this.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so as a scientist, it's really hard to set a lobe because we are never sure that it's actually the right level. But for management, you do need a certain number. So that's why we in Norway have now decided to go for these 145 dB for seismic, which is also based on older advice that set it to 20 nautical miles. And this is kind of, depending on the area, of course, a similar level. So we've slowly started to open up for companies that if they can prove they stay underneath 145 dBs in the spawning areas, that they can shoot closer than these 20 nautical miles or 5 nautical miles for smaller seismic surveys. So that's the first step towards a lobe, I think. But it's always risky to just transfer that to other areas. So you would need to, be a bit careful to actually adapt this as the holy number, I would say. But it's a point to start off with.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's the way to go forward, to have numbers, but not see them as the holy number, but always with a question mark behind it. Matthias.
Yes, I was part in writing the text for the lobe for continuous noise and in the EU level, and it was very, very intense, hard work because, as Karen say, we scientists don't really want to put a number on this. But I think just to have the definition to start with, give us incentive now to continue working. Some people are a little bit against this concept, but if we have not set something 2 years ago, then we would not been able to develop the field as we have now. And coming to what species we should have in the Baltic Sea, cod is of course one of those obvious ones for me, but one can see it in two ways. Do we go for maybe the most noise sensitive species in the Baltic Sea, or do we go for the species we have most data? A lot of the lobe threshold values, or whatever we call it, are data driven. So what do we know about the species, and can we actually say something about it? So there's some duality there. So I can think that we should maybe look into some other species maybe that have a big effect for the ecosystem. Of course, cod is one of the central pieces, but there are more species in there. But then we need also to put in the science behind and do much more studies on it. And especially, as I mentioned, try to follow some kind of good methodology that can feed into this threshold development as we see now. Aquaria studies give us a good piece of information on what kind of effects do we see from noise. But to get a threshold value from an aquaria study, is the information there is limited. But we know what to look for maybe when we do field studies and how to design them after an aquaria study. So all this is good piece of information for the bigger puzzle. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthias. Yes, I agree. We need at some point to just go forward, even if we're sure that there are still lots of gaps, and this is definitely a good way to go forward. At the workshop we had within EG Noise in September in Helsinki, we also talked about fish and invertebrates, and also thought that probably it should be two different species, one that is more coastal and one that is, for example, reproducing more in deep water or in the open water column. So that's maybe also something to consider next to the two questions that you just raised. Do we look at noise sensitivity, or do we look at where do we have actually data, and then put it together? We have about 15 minutes left for the discussion, so we'll slowly start wrapping this up. But I think what I would like us to sort of try to wrap up here, and we've heard about all the gaps that there are, but to go into the direction of the discussion of the things that Matthias just said, this might be a good step forward. We want to maybe look into different species. What would be these species, and what would be the next steps from your point of view as scientists that we need to take to be able to really do an assessment? In HELCOM or in the Baltic Sea, we have quite set deadlines. We always have the HOLAS report, so the holistic assessment, and HOLAS 4 is coming up, I think, in 2028. I might be wrong with that one, though. But we have a few years to work on this, but not so long. So, and usually a year before all the data is put together. So what, in your opinion, would be really the next steps to work on this, to find the right indicator species, to know which ones are the right ones, to set lobe, and to make this assessment? And yeah, maybe each one of you can say a few words to that. Maybe we start with you, Nina.
So I'm not an ecologist, so I'm not super versed with maybe the perfect fish species that would be we could look into. I think there's other people here that have a lot more experience and knowledge about that. But I think one of my main points of moving forward is also what Matthias said earlier, is that we need to start somewhere. And I agree that it's really hard to set thresholds, but I think just starting somewhere is a really, really good point. So maybe with mitigation measures that could be used regardless of species, such as like improvement of vessel propellers or something. So the ball could kind of be like moved away from more research, although it's definitely needed. into more the industry part where actually people have the funding to actually change something about the shipping industry as well. And I think, yeah, other people probably have a lot more knowledge on fish ecology here. So sorry about that.
That's fine. Thank you, Nina. Karen.
Yes, I'm not an expert on the Baltic, so I'm a bit careful here. But of course, I mean, if you look, as Matthias said, if you look for indicator species, you one that's important for the ecosystem, and preferably also one that's either there is a lot of data or it's easy to get a lot of data on. In Norway, we kind of automatically turn to cod and herring, both because they're important in the ecosystem, both very different. Herring is more pelagic and cod is more closer to the bottom. And cod hears very differently from herring. Herring hear the higher frequency as well, which is important to take into account. But then if you, for example, as we saw in the talk before, work with gobies or other small species that are actually very important for the ecosystem because they're food for everything else, those species are a lot easier to use in aquarium studies. So it's a lot quicker and cheaper to get a lot of useful information on gobies than for cod and herring. So there's a trade-off there as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the point of the invertebrates is also the food point in a way. It's not just looking at a species and the impact, but a lot of invertebrates are food for the bigger fish. So also a point to maybe take into account invertebrates and maybe making it also easier to assess. Okko, would you like to say a few words on the next steps that you would envision?
Yes, thank you. I don't have any I think good words to say about potential indicator species, but I want to touch something that Matthias and also Nina mentioned. When there is uncertainty in which species suffer the most due to noise, whether that's continuous or impulsive. And if, let's say, a country or an institution is interested in protecting their waters or making the waters more quiet or something else, then I think the approach should really focus on something that Nina mentioned, very low-hanging fruits. That how do you make ships more silent, whether that's technical measure or operational measure? How do you make leisure boats more quiet? How can you address, so especially when it comes to ships, there's a lot of discussion in this context or in other anthropogenic pressures that the work on shipping is done in IMO and it's slow and it takes time and it's very difficult to make quick changes there. But countries are, if there's enough will, countries are able to protect their own waters in many different ways. And if that does not make shipping quiet on a global scale, then it doesn't. But it can definitely make a difference in their own country scale. And then if enough countries do this in their own waters, it makes the sea and marine areas more tolerable in this sense. And the same applies to impulsive noise sources, so marine construction mainly. There are national regulations that can be applied. Some countries are much more developed in that field than Finland. I know that for sure. And this is something that I continuously try to bring up bring up to our ministries. They don't often listen to me, but I think there are a lot of ways of making changes already in many countries and regional seas.
Yeah, thank you, Okko. Yeah, I mean, this touches two things. So one is, how do we go on about getting a good assessment done, and then what mitigation measures can we maybe already do? So it's basically, yeah, two things that in parallel should go forward. Matthias.
Thank you. I'm jumping back to the indicated species.
Yeah, please.
And I think the idea of having more of a coastal species is good. We know, as Karen said, the gobids. We have, not me personally, but Karen and other has been studying that quite a lot. But just to make a small jump into uncertainties back again, because even though we get maybe good data on the fish, in the way the assessment is done now with soundscape maps, the uncertainty in going below, for example, 10 meters, which is shallow water, the uncertainty in the accuracy of the sound maps becomes huge. So we need to think about that when we try to go for a shallow water species. And there are a lot of developments need to be done in the soundscape maps creation and production in order to get good data in shallow waters. But I really support the idea of having a shallow water species as well, because of its importance in the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think to finish off, or to maybe do a last loop on the mitigation measures, I think this is one of the things that always seems important when we talk about noise. Noise, one of my old colleagues at CCB, who unfortunately left us, said, noise is a nice problem because you can just switch it off. So if you switch off noise, it's gone. If you make something quieter, it's quieter. It's not like any other sources of pollution, like litter or like eutrophication, that even if you stop it, they will stay on forever. So in a way, even though we have all the difficulties and uncertainties, it's a problem that can be dealt with. And once it's dealt with, the effect can be immediate, even if, of course, some of the impacts can be long term, that we've seen before with the threshold shifts and so on. So maybe one last round before Aliki then wraps us all up at the end. What do you see? And I know, Karen, you're not in the Baltic Sea, and Nina probably also not so much, but keeping in mind that the Baltic Sea is an environment heavily impacted by recreational boating too. What would be the maybe one or two main measures that you could see would help us reduce the underwater noise? Looking at shipping, looking at recreational boats, but also looking at construction work. Is there something that you would say, okay, this is really, if we did these two things, we would already have a much quieter area? And I will do the round like I did before. We only have 4 minutes left, so you don't have to do many words if you don't want to answer it too much. But just one last round, and I'll start with Nina again.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it differs that much from the Baltic to the Wadden Sea. I think it's very similar. And I think, yeah, maybe to identify very critical habitats and then protect them and have a no enter zone for certain times, especially when Karen mentioned that a cod or something is very sensitive to continuous noise throughout spawning and reproducing. And then we are again with the technical improvements or maybe limitations on how loud recreational vessels should be, maybe.
Thank you, Nina. Karen?
Yeah, so if I have to name two, I guess the easiest would be slow down, because you basically reduce noise everywhere. And then I agree with Nina that, yeah, blocking certain areas would really help as well.
Thank you. Okko?
Yes, I'll be quick. I agree with the previous talkers. technological advances. It's amazing how much this world has changed in the past 10 or even 5 years. So I think quiet technologies are out there. The problem may be that ships and boats have, some of them may have a long age, that the change comes slowly. But I strongly believe, even though I'm not an engineer, the technology is out there for sure.
Thank you. Matthias.
Yes, technical advances, yes, especially looking into maybe like recreational boats, but I would say raising an awareness, especially in the boating community, is one of those big things that we could do here and now. But I think many recreational boat people are interested in the environment and they would like to have a nice sea to operate in. So increasing awareness in those who actually drive around with boats. We don't reach all. Some will already always want to drive fast and so on. But I think that's one of those things we can do here and now.
Thank you very much. So with this, I would like to close the panel discussion and thank all the speakers, Nina Maurer, Karen de Young, Orko Uttinen, Matthias Andersen, also thanking Anna Sara, who is still with us. She wasn't quite sure she could stay the whole time, so that's why she's not on the panel, but who also gave a wonderful talk at the beginning. Thank you very much for this input, and I'll hand over to Aliki for the closing words.
Yes, thank you again. Thank you all for participating. I think that we can conclude now. We can say a few words. I think that it's quite obvious after today that we all know that this issue is important and we have evidence that it matters. We saw through the different presentations that we have many times we have measured individual responses, and we have many examples on that. But for example, as Anna Sara mentioned in her presentation, we need to also start measuring long-term effects. What is more, Nina and Orko, they both highlighted that it's a legal question, sometimes for applying restrictions in certain areas, so that we saw a little bit in the panel discussion is a whole different topic and needs to be, of course, more thoroughly investigated. Also saying that there is uncertainty on which type of noise species suffer the most. If a national entity is interested in protecting their waters, how to make ships more silent, either by technological or operational measures. We don't know if maybe no enter zones and technical improvements or limitations, or how loud recreational vessels should be. For sure, awareness in boating community is also a very important factor in that. And very hard to set certain measures and restrictions. Of course, we already know all of that, but I would like to close this webinar by saying that I think what Bettina said was very nicely put, very interesting. One of the colleagues saying that noise is easy to be shut off. It's easy to stop it, and once we stop it, it doesn't exist anymore. So we can't do it, and if we move forward with it, it can be easily implemented in a way that is a very nice thing to keep in mind. I want to thank once more our speakers and panelists. So thank you, Anna Sara, thank you, Nina, thank you, Karen, thank you, Orko, and of course, thank you, Matthias. Thank you also for making the presentations very vivid, very nice for the participants to have a sense and a perception of how fish also many times perceive noise. And of course, thank you, Bettina, for moderating the panel discussion, and of course for your very valuable input. Once again, I would like to remind to everyone that this is being recorded, and once we conclude, it will be public and you can all go back and rewatch this webinar. It will be online. as long as also the presentations of our speakers today, they will also be shared with you. And I think that is all for we have to say for today. I hope we all keep this very important issue in mind. And I wish you all a great evening. Thank you again and goodbye.
And thank you, Aliki, for guiding us through this.
Okay.
Have a good day.